Thank you for joining us today. Connecting with curriculum, the structure of curriculum, what is my child learning? Organizing learning for success, presented by Dr. Robertson and Dr. Vandevender. Thank you so much.
All righty. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller, and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here today for our presentation. I'm just going to take a quick minute and introduce myself, and then I will let my colleague, Dr. Vandevender, also introduce herself, and then I'll cover our agenda for today, and we will get started. So I'm Dr. Robertson. I am a professor at the Graduate School in Education at Keiser University. I am the program chair for our PhD program. I am a student advisor, and I also am a dissertation chair for our students working through the PhD. My background is in curriculum and instruction, and I have a lot of my practical experience in instructional design in particular, especially in public and charter schools in Florida. And Dr. Vandevender, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Vandevender. I am also a professor at Keiser University in the graduate school, and I mentor dissertation students as well. I direct the curriculum center, and I've come from a background in a brick and mortar school at the University of South Florida. I've been in this field for about 35 years, and I love teaching. I love instructional design. That's my specialty. I also left the university for a period of time and owned and started from the ground up an instructional design firm that ran for about 10 years, and have recently been with Keiser for about the last 8 years. So I'm delighted to be here today and talk a little bit about some of these topics in curriculum that I find so fascinating, as I know does Dr. Robertson.
All right, fantastic. So a little bit about our agenda today, and depending on your background, you may know this. If you are kind of new to navigating your child's education and experience, or even if you're a new teacher working on navigating this world we have of virtual and brick and mortar instruction, there are two main portions of learning that are extremely important to think about. The first one is our learners individually. So this is going to include the different ways that our children learn and ways that we can service them best so that they can really grasp and transfer what they're learning and be able to use it in the future. The second most important aspect of learning is our curriculum. And that focuses on what we're teaching and kind of how we organize that instruction for students to make sure that they have access to opportunities to learn. And please excuse the barking in the background. I just had a package dropped off. So today we're going to start out by talking about our learners and different strategies to meet learners who learn in different ways. And then the second half of the training is going to be about the four main parts of how we teach children. And those include how they first interact with new information, how they practice that new information that they're learning, how they receive feedback so that they know what they're practicing is effective, and then how we deepen. So once they've practiced and they learned what they've needed to learn, how can we as teachers assess that they can use and truly understand what it is that we have taught? All right, and I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Vandevender, who's going to walk us through some of the different types of learners and some of the best ways to motivate and get those learners to that highest potential possible. So Dr. Vandevender, I'm going to put myself on mute for now. Just let me know when you need me to move the screen.
Okay, thank you. Parents, teachers probably already know this, and some parents probably know this as well, but we all come to the learning situation with some different proclivities for how we like to learn, the ways that we learn best. And if you think about yourself, you probably know that there's certain ways in which you prefer learning things over other ways. And it's been broken down into 8 different categories. Actually, there used to be fewer, and depending upon how you look at it, there can actually be even more. But we tend to think about these 7 to 8 different ways in which people learn, and how we might approach teaching them based on what their preference is. There's a movement in the field of education today called differentiation. And teachers, I know you're familiar with this, and parents, you may hear your teachers talking about this, or even your students might mention it. But differentiation is a situation in which the teacher tries to teach differently in using some of these different ways to appeal to the different types of learners. If your child likes learning visually, or if they're a social learner, the teacher will try to teach lessons in different methods and different methodologies, so that it appeals to different learners. We're not necessarily individualizing for every child, but we're offering them opportunities to see different ways of learning, to see that if they might be interested in those, if they appeal to them, rather than the typical old way of learning, which everything was a chalkboard, a teacher, and a lecture. So we've really moved away from that. That's called differentiating. And on the screen here, you see what some of the types of learners are: visual, spatial, oral, auditory, physical, tactile, verbal, analytical, social, solitary, and natural. And we'll talk a little bit about what those things are if you want to move forward, Dr. Robertson. So a visual learner is typically a person that sees things in a spatial sense. They learn things really well by manipulating them, or looking at a map, or drawing something, or looking at a drawing or a schemata. So how do we teach those people the best? If you find that your child likes to learn by doing something spatially, then they're sort of maybe kinetic. They like to work with their hands, but that isn't always the case. It might be that they like to look at a map or a diagram of something. And you can see this girl on the left is building a teepee with logs and branches. And it helps her understand spatially what to do. It helps with geometric skills, and all kinds of things can be learned by building something like that. So she's comfortable learning that way, and might take instruction in different senses, but likes to put things together. So if you have a child that likes to do that, they're probably a spatial learner. Maybe they want to take apart the toaster, and you might be wanting to stop them from doing that, but that's how they figure something out and understand how it works. They want to know how things work. Okay, Dr. Robertson. The next, and you probably are familiar with this, and maybe some of you are even an oral learner. You like to hear things. If you like audiobooks and it clicks with you, you like to listen, then you could very well be an oral learner. Interestingly, lecture works really well with oral learners. They enjoy listening to someone talk. Maybe they ask questions, but they take in information by hearing it. They like books on tape. They like podcasts, including, if you want to teach a child and engage them, there are some programs that let them design their own podcasts. And they could be doing that as well as listening to podcasts. So these are some of the ways to approach oral learners. Go ahead, Dr. Robertson. The physical learner is kind of related to, and by the way, these are not discrete. Your child might have more than one of these capabilities and like learning in multiple ways. And that's what differentiation is about, is finding how many of these they have. So they might be that visual learner, and also they might be a physical learner. They like to move things, touch things. They like to be involved. They like their body to be involved in maybe acting things out. They want to be in a laboratory. They want to build something. So those are some of the things that they enjoy learning, and that's how they enjoy learning and doing things. Go ahead, Dr. Robertson. We often think about verbal, meaning speaking, but a verbal learner is more than just talking. It's a person that likes words, that likes to write, that likes to read, that is very good at manipulating words, that is good at talking, understanding the language, maybe even multiple languages, and even listening, like with an oral learner. But that verbal learner has a really strong word sense. And you probably know whether you or your child is that verbal learner. And some of the ways that you can interact with that child for learning would be reading, writing things, doing oral reports, anything that involves them using language in some way will be enjoyable to them. Go ahead, Dr. Robertson. The analytical learner is a problem solver. That person is logical. They want to take things apart in a different sense from the person that wants to rebuild the toaster, but they want to figure out a problem and create something new from it. They want to analyze it, tear it apart, and build something back up. So they're very successful at solving problems. And if you ask them to analyze something and see what it means, or find out what that means and then tell you what might happen next, or solve a mystery, solve something physical even, playing chess, playing games, they do very well with those kind of things. And those kind of tasks are typically considered to be logical. So as you can see, some of these types of learners are similar, and they cross over into categories. Go ahead, Dr. Robertson. Your child might be a social learner. We seem to stratify a little bit into solitary or social, and some of us have a mix of both. And some people really learn best when they're working with other people, asking questions, working in a group, showing someone else how to do something, watching somebody do it, and then trying it, discussing it, that kind of thing. They don't work well if they're left alone. And so it's important to know that about your child. And do they work better with other people? Or you can move forward, Dr. Robertson. Are they a solo learner? Do they like to work independently? Do they prefer to work on their own and solve something? They don't want the interaction with people as much. They might want it a little bit. And if you look at this little boy on the right, you'll see he's probably a verbal learner and a solo learner. He's very comfortable with a book, reading something, looking at words, and doesn't mind working on his own. You can give a solo learner a set of directions. They'll walk through something, they'll work on a project. They'll take instructions and follow a task through to completion. They enjoy that, and they prefer it to the interaction that might be involved in a group project. So as teachers, we have to think about how do we adapt when we have a student who's not good or doesn't want to do working in a group. What can we do? What kind of roles can we assign them so they feel comfortable if they don't like socializing as much? And if you have a student that's very sociable, how can you work with them to make sure that they can, if they're left with working on something solo, what can you do with that student so that they feel like they have that interaction? The naturalist learner, this is kind of a new one. This has been added to the pantheon of different types of learners. And this is a person who's sort of like the physical learner. They like to be outside. They like working with things in nature, could be in a laboratory or could even be at home planting plants. They learn by watching something happen and interacting with something physical in nature. So you might have a child that likes to do that. You can learn on a hike. They could learn by, we're going to look at a virtual field trip in a little while that goes through a rainforest, and that would be something that they would probably be very interested in. So you can think about which one of these or which ones of these does your child fall into. And what we're going to talk about during the rest of our session today is how you interact and how you give feedback. What are the strategies and how do you deepen information for each of those different types of learners?
Let me take myself off mute so you can actually hear me. So the next piece of this presentation is now going to combine not only who our learners are and how they learn best, but also how we organize our curriculum and what our learners are learning so that we can service them and provide opportunities for them to learn the best. So our teachers out there learn that there are 4 major parts to a lesson or a unit or a content that they are working on teaching. Now, of course, we know that the content itself, so what the students are learning, comes from our state standards. And we do have access to those state standards through CPOM, through the Florida Department of Education. So they actually tell us, specifically by the end of this grade level, here is the main concepts or the main content that the child should learn. But how we set that up as teachers and organize it to ensure that we're giving them the opportunity to learn that content or that subject area is something that we focus on individually within our classrooms, within our schools, within our collaborative relationships with other teachers and our teams. So again, there are 4 main aspects of curriculum. So whenever a teacher begins to teach a new topic or a new subject, the very first thing that they do is allow the child to interact with the new information. This usually is used to kind of grab the learner's attention, to give the basic information like vocabulary or basic background, history, connections to maybe something that they just learned or something that they will learn in the future. So it just kind of introduces that new topic in an interesting way to grab the child's attention. From there, once the information is given to the student, and this is typically teacher-led or teacher-directed, unless they're creating some sort of cool project or experiment where the kids are getting their hand dirty in order to learn about that topic. But what happens after is we provide opportunity for the child to practice what we're teaching so that we can watch them as teachers, we can observe, we can give them feedback, we can direct them, we can catch if they're making mistakes or have misconceptions, and we can fix those mistakes and misconceptions to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So during that practice, the child is also getting feedback. They should be provided the opportunity to kind of fix their thinking based on that feedback and to try again until they are practicing correctly. And then once the teacher knows or is able to assess, typically through some sort of formative assessment, that the children are ready, they have the background that they need, they've learned what they needed to. The last part of a lesson or a unit is that deepening. So it's some aspect or assignment or paper or project or more critical thinking activity that the students are given to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of what they've learned and to practice it or to learn it on that deeper level. Once we know that the students are able to truly grasp that content, then we can connect it to the next lesson, or we can move forward in that instruction. So the true test of learning for our learners is that they can transfer. What this means is that they can go from that practice and a basic understanding of what we're teaching and transfer it into a deeper, more critical practice, or to pull it back later. So when the students sit down for their state exams, being able to answer the questions on those exams effectively is an assessment of transfer. If we have done a good enough job with practicing, giving feedback, giving them opportunity to really deepen what they're learning so that later on they can respond to that. So what we're going to do now is go through each of these 4 different steps within the learning process. And we're going to talk about some different ways that students who learn, as Dr. Vandevenner went through in some of those different styles, would best be able to be supported. So I'm going to ask Dr. V that she jumps in if there's any other ideas that she can think of or anything that she would like to share with any of these. So let's start with step number 1. This is where students interact with new information. This is the first time that they encounter the new lesson or new information that they're going to learn. So what teachers think about when they design this activity or they design their introduction into a new lesson is, how am I going to interest the students? How am I going to activate any prior knowledge they may have had? So if we've talked about this before, or they've experienced this before, how am I going to activate that? Is there any essential vocabulary that they need to know so they understand what I'm talking about? Can I connect this with any past learning or subjects? How am I going to give the students the learning objectives, which we always want to do right up front, right? We want them to know where they're going by the end of this lesson so that they can kind of monitor themselves in their head so that they know what direction everything is headed. And then how am I going to teach these children directly so that they are given the correct information, the correct demonstration that they need in order to practice it? So as teachers are asking themselves these questions, we also need to think about the way that the children learn best. So if we know we have a child as a parent or a classroom full of children as a teacher that are, most of them are visual and spatial learners, this is where, again, as a reminder, they will see and imagine and manipulate material in order to learn best. We may want to introduce our lesson or our content area by using maps or diagrams or some sort of mind map or graphic organizer. Maybe we want to provide them pictures to look at or drawings that they can create in order to get interested in the topic that they are learning. So if you have these children, it's great to avoid too much text. I mean, you can add labels because they like visually to look at those labels, but activities that stimulate them visually would be best. So using colors to highlight text, especially if those colors are showing essential vocabulary, encouraging students to create diagrams, to create flow charts, all of those storytelling to engage visualization in the topics are great ways to get students into that topic area. Okay, and then on the left here, and this is how it's going to be for all of our slides, we have some different strategies that teachers or parents can use. So pulling up videos, story building software, using flashcards to learn new vocabulary, mind maps, avatars maybe to introduce the objectives, flowcharts. All of those are great ways to engage our visual learners. Okay, so let's move next to our auditory learners. And this is the kind of learner that I am. So again, as a reminder, these are learners that like to listen and participate in discussions and lectures and presentations. So for auditory learners, again, if you know your child's auditory, or we have a classroom full of learners who learn best in this way, you can allow them to work together to encourage them to talk things out. You may consider using an audio book or some sort of video clip to get them interested in what you're about to teach, possibly a podcast or music to kind of engage their senses. So all of those, digital voice recorders, which we're going to be looking at one a little bit later as a demonstration, audiobooks, things like that would be a great way to gain their interest and start that introduction into the topic that you're going to be teaching. Our next one is our physical learners. So as a reminder, these are the kiddos who like to use their bodies in order to learn and do things. So if we start out by having them demonstrate something to the class or to act out an idea or a concept, maybe to draw or build a model or to get their hands dirty as they learn about something, maybe in science that they're about to learn, having them invent or build something, and then teaching them the problem and those steps afterwards, having them move around while learning, so getting up out of the seats and kind of moving through the classroom, doing stations or something along those lines would be a great way to introduce a new topic or content area for the students. And then again, on the left, I'm not going to read through all of these, but just some different ideas that teachers or parents could use to help those physical learners interact by building something or doing something.
And let me just add, Dr. Robertson, that this would apply to any content area. So you could have these learners, and what we're trying to say is these are some of the strategies, then the methodologies that might work with with these different types of learners, but they can be applied to geography, science, math, language arts. And there's not one way to do it, but some ways work better than others for each of these types of learners in different in different subject areas.
Right, absolutely.
And even if with group work, a teacher can see that if you have a group, not so much with young children, but with let's say middle grades, you're going to have a differentiated type of group. Your children are going to have different abilities and different proclivities toward learning. So you can think about which one, and all teachers do this anyway, which one is going to want to do the presentation after a group is over, come back and report to the class. That's going to obviously be your verbal learner is going to be the one who's going to want to do that. Or maybe they might want to take the notes. They might be the person that's going to write it down. You might have another student who's more retiring and wants to work alone, and they could be keeping track of information or taking notes. And someone else could be testing something. That might be your activity learner, so your physical learner. So it's thinking about what these different types of characteristics are and how you can apply them in the classroom to help each child learn the best for their way of learning.
All right, absolutely. Thank you. So just, I mean, as Dr. Vandeventer said, as additional, our verbal learners, again, those are our students who like writing and listening and speaking and working with words. So engaging them in activities that involve writing or creating a play or reading out loud could definitely be a way to introduce that content or the topic. Again, story building, outlining programs. I think in one of our past presentations, Dr. Vandeventer showed a sample of a cartoon creator or a comic book creator, which would be an awesome way for these verbal learners to take the information that they're given from the teacher and to kind of put it down into words or into a visual means of understanding the information that the teacher is giving.
And also, Dr. Robertson, for visual learners that are not necessarily as verbal, they might like using something like Glogster, where they're creating like a poster board, and they can move pictures and text around on the screen and create something that's unique to their topic. So they would probably like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now we have our analytical and logical learners. So these are the ones that kind of like organizing and solving problems and understanding relationships between items, giving lots of data and information. So these would be the students that you may want to start out with, giving them a problem to solve and having them struggle with working through it, or a flow charting program where as they get the lecture or the PowerPoint that the teacher is using to deliver this beginning information, they can kind of start filling in the gaps or the story that the teacher is telling them. And keep in mind too that you're going to likely have, unless you're a parent working with one child, you're going to have learners that in a classroom that learn in many different ways. So typically what we would recommend, and I'll ask Dr. V to jump in on this, but it would be to choose a beginning activity that is going to appease the majority of the children. Instead of sticking with what you're comfortable with as a teacher, think about who your learners are and how they learn best, and choose the activities that will meet the majority of their needs. And then in subsequent activities, whether it's when they're practicing or working on a project, then you can offer some of those other options for students that learn in different ways to maybe choose from. So you can't teach the same thing in 5 different ways, or else we run out of time in the school year. But you would want to pick what the majority of the children will be able to interact best with, and then provide some other options later on for those other kids to also demonstrate in their best learning method. Would you agree with that, Dr. V?
I would definitely agree with that. And it speaks to differentiation and the difference between differentiating and individualizing. Sometimes we can individualize for each student, and there's a need for that. And we can offer the instruction in a specific way for that child. And other times it's not possible. And so what we do then is we differentiate, and we do exactly what you just said. We offer to the larger group what we think is going to fit the best. And then we branch off from there and have the students do some different things that will appeal to those students who might not have fit with that main category, and let them get an opportunity, everyone get an opportunity to try doing something physical or oral that they might not normally find is their learning preference. I mean, I'm very much a verbal learner, and that's how I love to learn. And I'm a solo learner. So when I'm placed in a social learning situation that's oral, it stresses me out. I don't want to learn that way. And I don't like to interact that much, but put me by myself and have me using words, and I'm as happy as a clam. So, but it's good to stretch me a little bit and get me trying some other things. And then I become more comfortable working in groups and so forth. And our kids are exactly the same. It's just getting an opportunity to try it.
Absolutely. Very good. So our social learners, and this would be opposite of Dr. V, we're going to encourage these kids to share, to help each other, to maybe read out loud. So doing shared project or document or art project where they construct a model together, or they role play something. This is going to really interest and get those social learners motivated and involved. And then you have our solitary learners, where they really like to think through problems and challenges by themselves. So this is where maybe we give them some independent time to read, or to give them some directions to follow on their own before they share or work together as a group. So these, you could use different strategies such as readings or drawings, or have them create an online video and then share it together. So it's definitely possible, as Dr. Vandevenner was saying, to align some of these different learners together, give them the opportunity to practice in their own way first, and then to do some activities in a way that may be a little bit different for them. And that probably will avoid in the future those children who do get really stressed out, like us, when we're put together in social learning situations, or we have to share something or present something along those lines.
I was just going to add, on the screen with the solitary learners, you mentioned some of the text showed that solitary learners don't always express to the teacher what they know. So it's important for the teacher or the parent to talk with them to make sure that they understand it, because they typically are maybe they're even ahead. They're doing really well, and they often like to help other students. So if you assign them to help someone else, they're thrilled. They become more sociable then when they're given an opportunity to help someone else, because they're often ahead of the class in what they know. They're simply not necessarily sharing that with everybody. So it's fascinating when you start to think about the ways in which your child learns. And sometimes we think my child is not doing well, but that's maybe only because they're not responding to the teaching that's occurring in that particular style. Something else might appeal to them. So it's something to think about.
Yeah, and it's a great opportunity for parents too. If you know your child is struggling, and a teacher, for example, shared a video and the kid just can't sit still long enough to watch the video, perhaps that it's not engaging them enough. They're not a visual or an auditory learner. Maybe they need to, instead of watch a video, go to one of those virtual field trips and touch and click the mouse and play around on their own, because they're a hands-on learner or a naturalistic learner, and then all of a sudden it will click. So it's a great opportunity too for parents to understand what portion of the curriculum the teacher is working on. So if we know we're just introducing the topic here, you can then step in and offer them the opportunity to find a resource or to try that introduction in a little bit of a different way. And well, let me finish this and then I'll go to the next part. But the naturalistic learners, again, building outside activities, encouraging experiments. So this would be, those nature cams or videos, or a walking or guided tour, or an online science or math experiment where they can, actually see in front of them or touch things. I've seen virtual frog dissections. So maybe instead of them just sitting back and watching a video, you do one of the virtual ones where they actually touch the tools with the mouse and, make the incisions and look at the inside of the frog. So just a different way to help these kids that may be struggling, maybe more motivationally. And that was the part that I wanted to really focus in on in this, the beginning piece. That's why we spent so much time with how we introduce content to the children, because that is where it's going to show through their motivation, maybe their behavior. If there's issues with classroom management in the beginning when they're learning something new, it's often because they just haven't been engaged in a way that's effective for them as they learn something new, brand new. So we want to engage them right off the bat, and then typically there are higher probability that you'll have less behavior issues and motivation issues throughout if you have gained their interest effectively in the beginning. So the next three parts of the curriculum, where we practice after we learn something, where we're given feedback, and then where we deepen, I'm not going to spend as much time on, but we'll still offer you some suggestions. The reason we're not spending as much time on this is because this typically is the job of the teacher. Allowing students to practice and giving them that feedback is a hard job for parents. And we completely understand that. Is it possible? Yes, you can definitely help, but a lot of parents don't feel super confident or comfortable with effectively supporting and observing their child practice and providing them feedback. So the next couple slides here, are good for parents to listen to, because they can definitely help, but it also is probably more for what the teacher's role is after they've introduced content and the students have kind of played with new learning a little bit. So practice typically happens after direct teaching has occurred. So the students have learned what they needed to learn from the new content, and now they need to actually utilize that content in action. They need to practically apply it. And before they become masters or experts at applying what they've learned, they have to practice it, just like we all have to do. Before we got really good at driving, we had to practice doing it. Before we got really good at making Thanksgiving dinner, we had to practice, and we had to make some mistakes in order to get good at doing it. So during practice, we typically want student-centered approaches. So whereas where we introduce content, it's teacher-guided, we are now turning this over to the students, and the teacher becomes the facilitator of this practice, because it's the kids taking over learning for themselves. Practice can happen both independently or collaboratively. Typically, what we suggest during practice is we don't want to correct misconceptions immediately. So if a kid does something, they struggle, and you say, nope, that's wrong, not the best way to handle practicing. Instead, we would want to ask some probing questions. We want to give them scaffolded support. We want to guide them to a different thought or idea. And then we say, yes, now you understand, and you correct that misconception that they had. If students still continue to struggle after they've practiced, one important thing I remember I learned a long time ago was we do not want to practice the wrong thing too many times. because then the wrong thing becomes embedded into our understanding. So if the kid is still struggling, still having a hard time, that's where we say, stop, enough. And then we reteach that topic, maybe in a different way. So this could be maybe a mini lesson for, you know, a handful of students that are really struggling with it. It could be maybe putting them into small groups, and the groups that are ahead a certain way that they begin to practice or to deepen, and then the teacher works with the ones that are struggling. But this is where we stop the misconceptions and the mistakes, and we make sure that we correct them and work with the child to fix it. So again, here's our different types of learners. So these are our suggestions for how to practice effectively with these different learners. So again, you know, worksheets, mind maps for those visual spatial learners to practice are fine. If you have auditory learners, maybe you want to do a discussion or breakout groups or provide them questions. If you have those physical learners, they want to probably engage and move around, work with partners to practice what they're learning. If you have verbal learners, this may be where they're writing. Maybe you have them write an essay, or you use something like cork boards to have them demonstrate what you have taught them. If you have those analytical learners, this is again where you might use something like Padlet to have them demonstrate the different parts or components to break things down or to organize. Those social learners, you know, discussions, work with partners, practice with partners. Our solo learners can reflect. They may read and take notes. Our natural learners may analyze or organize or you know, demonstrate something in a computer program to really get involved in practicing that content. Right? Dr. Vandevenner is our resident expert in feedback. So the third step, once our children are practicing what they're teaching, and this kind of happens simultaneously with that practice, but it's going to be how we provide them feedback to support them and to correct any misconceptions once we see that they've struggled long enough. Because again, we don't want to practice the wrong thing over and over and over again. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. V, and she's going to talk us through some different options for providing feedback.
Okay, it's very similar to some of the things you talked about a minute ago, with a few small exceptions. First of all, there's two types of feedback, which are formative and summative. And really, the best feedback and the most feedback that teachers are giving until we get to assessment is typically what we call formative, where we're helping the students to learn the material, and you give them formative feedback that helps them to build their concept and to understand what they're learning. And you eventually, even with formative feedback, you may be reteaching something to make sure that they understand. You always want to be positive. You always want to give them very specific information and directive. This doesn't mean that when someone's exploring and they're doing something by experimentation, that's not specific. But sometimes the best way to tell a person or to get them to learn something is simply to tell them. It can be the quickest route to understanding is to learn something. So we often are simply learning simple facts and learning the basics before we move on to explore and to experiment. So sometimes we want to be very specific and directive and in our instructions on what they need to do. And then when we give feedback, we want to say what went wrong and what they can do to correct that. And you direct them to make that change. And you make it very individualized for each student, so that you can walk around a room, you can talk with individual students, you can work with them online. There's all types of ways to do it, because each of those students, as you know from this presentation, is going to be different and have a different way in which they learn the material. So this is a time for the teacher to really work with those students individually and figure out where the problems are and solve those problems one at a time. Go ahead, Dr. Robertson. Feedback should not be summative, which means that's the sort of assessment to determine what a student has actually learned. We're giving some sort of a score, or we're giving some sort of a rating or a grade. We don't want to do that until the students have really practiced a lot, have lots of formative assessment. They've had an opportunity to try over and over again, and we believe that they've learned material. Then we do a summative feedback, but we don't give them a summative sort of assessment and give them a summation saying, no, you don't know this, or yes, you know this, until we believe that they really have gained it. And you never want to be penalizing or offer confusing feedback that doesn't help to continue to move them forward and build that scaffold for the student. Go ahead, Dr. Robertson. And here's an example of positive feedback, meaningful feedback. And it always should be positive. It should always be specific. It should have information in it and directive, telling the student what to do. So let's suppose the student has read a story. So it's a good try, but not quite, Alex. In this, they were supposed to identify the main idea. In this story, the main idea is related to the character's feelings about one of his family members. Would you like to think about it more and answer again? Would you like a hint? So what are some of the things that are going on in this teacher's response? This is how the teacher responded formatively. Go ahead, Dr. Robertson. The positive part was he or she said, good try, but not quite, Alex. Would you like to think about it more and answer again? The child has power and control. They have some agency and authority. And next, they're being specific. In this story, the main idea is related to the character's feelings about one of his family members. So they're telling them a little bit of information to help them understand it. And then finally, be very directive. And that you ask, would you like a hint? And then you give them a hint. They'll always say yes. The occasional student will not take a hint, but most will. And you give them some things to think about that prompt them to be able to identify what that main idea is. So you've helped to build their understanding through formatively responding to them about what the actual main idea is, instead of just handing it to them. So when we think about feedback for these very different kinds of learners, let's look at a little bit. If you're giving feedback to a visual learner, you might say, think about this and imagine or visualize the parts or a solution. So maybe you're showing them a map and you say, think about, or a maze, think about a solution to this maze. Before you start drawing on this maze, imagine how the path might be to come to the end before you write on it. With an oral learner, you might say, can you remember the conversation? What was said? How did that go? What did that mean? With a physical learner, you might prompt them by saying, imagine yourself doing something. What would you be doing if you were learning X? A verbal learner, you might say, what is something that you could write down that would tell me a little bit more about that? Give me some ideas about this topic. Go ahead. With the analytical learner, of course, they want to solve a problem. Can you devise a solution to something? Can you figure this out? A social learner, you might ask them to explain it to someone else. They would imagine solving this by telling someone else a solution. The solo learner, you might say, think about this, analyze it, and reflect on what it means. The natural learner likes to categorize things. The nature learner typically likes to put things in categories. They like to organize things. They're somewhat like the analytical learner, interestingly. And you might say, where does this fit in with ideas on X? And you might give them an example from nature. So that's some of the feedback that we can give to our particular learners about remediation. There are some great examples, and we talked about these last time. We're not going to go them today. We don't have time, but there are some great examples on CPALMs and the parent resources and the DOE website that talk about remediation that allow you to remediate. Do you have any comments on that further, Dr. Robertson?
Nope, I don't think so. I think we went over how to navigate these resources last time, but I think the big thing is after you've provided feedback, if you see the child is still struggling, still getting it wrong, they're not getting good grades on any formative or summative assessments, then we don't just ignore it and move on to the next topic. We set that child up for some sort of remediation. It could be extra practice. It could be a tutoring session. It could be maybe something that you assign online for them to look at and work on a little bit more, and providing them some of that more specific feedback. The goal is you won't have too many once you get to this point that need that remediation. And then if you have any students that are receiving services, for any sort of special needs or any sort of outside support, that's a great time for you to work with your paraprofessional or your co-teacher to really be able to hone in on how they can help support that remediation for that child. If you're noticing that the whole class is struggling and they're just not getting it, that might be time, instead of remediation, to go back and provide instruction in a different way. Scaffold a little bit more and try not to move forward until you have the majority of that class who's grasped the concept.
It's interesting to think about today how much is out there on the internet that students can learn from and where we can remediate and give them experiences. Dr. Robertson talked about the frog dissection. I taught a class last term where I was teaching multimedia, and I had my students I showed them a online brain surgery, and it wasn't a literal brain surgery, but it was graphically designed stylistically to show what the elements of brain surgery were. And looking at that, we went through the steps of it and saw how to do it. And by the end, we all felt like we could do brain surgery, and knowing full well that we couldn't, but it made it clear, something that we would never get a chance to try or really see how it worked, but we could see that on the computer. There's so many things you can do. There are a lot of really neat interactive field trips out there on Common Sense Education. We're not going to go to that today, but if you go to this link, you'll see there are 32 different field trips that you can take your kids on or let them go to on their own. They've been vetted by teachers. They've been reviewed by teachers and parents, and they're all very interesting, all types of different things. The Nature Conservancy is one of the places we didn't explore too much in the last couple of presentations we did, and they've got some wonderful field trips. I think we're running out of time. We may not go to these today, Dr. Robertson, but I will mention that there's one called Recording the Rainforest, which is great for oral learners because it takes them on a trip through the rainforest where they can hear what the health of the rainforest is instead of see it. And this is what the Nature Lab looks like when you go to the virtual field trips site, and you can just scroll down and see some of the things that are available. There's one on changing climate. There's this is an interesting, we won't look at this now, but it's really an interesting, it starts off as a little cartoon and it drops you into a field trip about climate change all over the world, looking at different cities. And kind of fascinating, because what happens on a virtual field trip is the best ones will have not only showing the child things about the problem, such as climate change, but letting them click on maps and look at what's happening in different places, do things. They can interact. There's one here on the rainforest. There's another one on taking a canoe trip. This is interesting, a view from a canoe. And they can actually be in a canoe and travel around through Clayoquot Sound up in British Columbia. And that's fascinating. And in most of these are led by scientists who are ethnically different, younger women. They're not, as one of the scientists says, she goes, "I'm not just some old guy teaching you in a white lab coat. I'm a scientist that's out in the real world showing you how science works." And it's relatable to children. They can go on a trip to the coral reefs and actually do some fun things underwater and learn about the China's forests and great pandas. There's so many wonderful field trips on here, as well as Smithsonian and Annenberg, lots NPR. There are wonderful places on the internet that have great field trips. And you probably want to vet these in advance to be sure you think it's appropriate for your child, but they've mostly been vetted by teachers and parents already. So I'll let you go ahead, Dr. Robertson. I wish we had more time to look at these in depth, but they're very interesting. So go to them and try it.
Absolutely. And we'll share those resources with you guys. But again, a fantastic way to help students interact with new content that they're learning. So let's move forward to the next step again. Step 2 is practicing. And one of the things that I wanted to show you is a resource called PlayPosit, which is a very cool resource. And I want to show you, PlayPosit is a way to embed interactive questions or resources or opportunities for students to discuss and interact together into online videos or any sort of video that you're showing. So I simply went on to YouTube, and I said, okay, if I'm a math teacher and I'm teaching the Pythagorean theorem, here's a really cool video from Khan Academy that teaches the students the Pythagorean theorem. So if the students are practicing the Pythagorean theorem and how it's used, how they figure out a formula using this theory, I may show them this video of how to use it. All right, so I just wanted to show you what the video looks like beforehand, and it's very instructional. Again, Khan Academy is an excellent resource to use. So now let's kind of jazz this up a little bit as a teacher here. And we're gonna go to something called playposit.com. And if you scroll down to, actually you go to sign up. Oh man, I'm already signed up, so it's going right in. But let me show you. If you go down, scroll down to where it says right here, Classroom Basic, get started for free. You click that, you answer a couple questions, and you hit begin, and it automatically activates your account. So when you get into PlayPosit, it's very simple right here. It has your account activated. The videos that you create to make interactive are called bulbs, and they can be stored in this PlayPosit account. The final product that you create either gives you a URL that you can send out to students via email or text, or to embed into your course. It also syncs with Google Classroom. And I just wanted to read to you guys some of the options that this PlayPosit has. You can put a live discussion board at any time during a video. You can chain or scaffold multiple interactions together. So for example, you could scaffold questions to start with easier and get harder and harder. You can embed a quiz into a video. You can customize a video, which means you can edit it and cut out just a piece that you want the kids to watch, and then you can place the interaction anywhere within that video. You can add images that pop up, formulas, other videos. You can include polls, multiple choice questions. You can pause the video automatically as the children are watching it, and then have something that pops up from you where you can put your own URL or video or resource, so the kids would stop watching, go to that resource, and then they would be able to return back to the video. It's very easy to create. So you add a new bulb, you pick the video, so you put in the URL that you want to use, you hit add interaction, and then it gives you a little bar that you put where you want the interaction to show up. Once you do that, a screen shows up and it walks you through everything that you need to do and gives you your choices of what you can put in. That bulb saves into the library once you're done, which I have right here to show you what the library looks like. You can also assign it to a class. So if you have all of your students logged into PlayPosit, you can create a class with those kids, and you can put as many of these videos as you would like in here. I did one, it's really quick and basic. So let me just show you what this looks like. And I'm gonna show you the exact video we just looked at from the Khan Academy for the Pythagorean theorem. And let me fast forward and show you exactly the part that I just showed you. There is my interaction. So as you can see, I stopped here, and this is what I wrote. A triangle means that one of the angles in the triangle must be, and then here is where students would fill in 90 degrees. So it's just my quick check. They would submit it, and I would see how everybody answered. You can put as many of those in the video as you would like, but it's my quick check to make sure they're watching and it's stopping and interacting with them as they go through. Okay, so that's play pause it. The next step was in our curriculum is feedback. So we have students practicing, they're watching videos, they're answering questions, you're making sure that they understand the content. And again, you're giving them feedback as they practice. So this one I wanted to show you is called VoiceThread. And this is what the main website looks like for VoiceThread. You go up here to register, and all it asks you for is an email address to register your account, and then it logs you in automatically. So when you log into VoiceThread, this is kind of what it looks like. And I wanted to show you guys again, just a quick one that I created. But all you do, and it walks you through, is you hit create. It gives you some comment choices. So if you have a student's worksheet or a student's piece of writing or you know, a project that they created, you can take that and add text, add a voice message, add a video message, upload a link to other resources or documents, add a picture, anything that you want to do to that kid's work. And this is a great way to provide virtual feedback, both in writing, again, for those verbal learners. You can do it through voice message for those oral learners. You can draw on the document for those visual learners. So a lot of options here.
And let me add, Dr. Robertson, yeah. let me add, you can also run it, you can show a video on this as well, just as they did on the home screen with the hawk flying, and then talk about, let's suppose, aerodynamics with the wings of that hawk. So you can manipulate these videos in this program as well. It's fascinating, some of the things that are possible on these programs.
Yeah, and let me just show you what this looks like. This is a quick one I created. So let's say my kid wrote this paragraph. I'm the teacher, I want to give them feedback on this.
We can't hear your audio. It may not be turned on.
Did you say you cannot hear it?
No.
Okay.
But it was clear that we could see that there was audio. It must not be transmitting across this presentation.
Okay, I apologize for that, guys. So basically what I'm saying is you did a great job on this. There's a couple things that we can improve upon in the next little bit of writing. You know, I was able to circle, if you can see on the screen, you know, the question asked you to explain why. So instead of saying the word things, actually tell me what things in particular and why. And then at the end, I said, if you need help coming up with reasons why we study the past, there is a link, and then this link pops up. And I said, Josh, you can go right to the Smithsonian Mag. And there's an awesome article about why the world wars should be taught in schools. And this gives some great reasons about why we learn about wars and things that happened in the past, so that then Josh would be able to click on that link and go to the website. So again, just another great way to meet those different learning needs of the students who may, who may work better with feedback from given to them in different ways. Sorry about that, guys. I gotta fast forward back through. Actually, this may be easier down here. Voice. There we go. Okay. The last one that we were going to cover, and we are almost done. I'm sorry, we're a little bit past our time here, but it's about deepening knowledge. So at this point, the students have learned, they've practiced, they've received feedback. Now they're ready to interact and deepen for more learning use. So this is where the teacher would expand their critical thinking. They would maybe tie knowledge with the new concept. They would create a project or a task that's authentic for the kids to try and to work through. They would provide maybe enrichment opportunities to think deeper into what they're learning. And again, for all of those different learners, these are critical thinking questions that could be asked to meet their needs and to allow them to deepen their understanding a little bit more. Now, I know, Dr. Vandevenner, you would probably also agree that the last piece that we didn't talk about today is about assessment, and that's usually the last little bit of what a teacher will do to wrap up and to make sure the students have learned what they needed to do. And I just want to let everybody know that we do have a professional development coming up on the 9th, which I believe is next Thursday. And we're going to dig more into that idea of deepening content, and assessment. So I know I breezed very quickly through deepening here because that is such a fun and essential aspect of what teachers do to make sure that their children are learning and can transfer that learning into different situations and authentically practice it. And that also comes along with how we assess them on that deepening aspect of curriculum. So we're going to save that for next time, which is next Thursday, which is, I guess, our final deeper step into how our learners are learning and how we assess that deepening of content. So Dr. Vandevenner, is there anything before we take questions that you would like to add to the end of our presentation?
No, you've done a beautiful job, and I think we're all set. If there's any questions, we'd love to take them.
All right. Well, Dr.